The red wave that wasn't. Although some races are still too close to call, it appears the midterm results haven't exactly been the sweep that so many on both sides of the aisle had expected. In one of the big three states to watch, Pennsylvania voted Democrat John Fetterman into the U.S. Senate, flipping a Republican seat and denying Trump-backed TV doctor Mehmet Oz the job. He was one of several MAGA Republicans who lost their races. At the time of this taping, Arizona and Nevada's Senate races remain too close to call. And once again, Georgia's will go to that runoff in December, all of which are likely to decide the Senate balance of power. Here in Massachusetts, there was a wave, the blue kind, and an historic one at that, with Andrea Campbell officially the first woman of color to win a statewide contest. She'll be the Attorney General. And the current Attorney General, Maura Healey, not only is the first ever woman elected governor in Massachusetts, but the first openly gay woman to be elected governor in the nation.
I want to say something to every little girl and every young LGBTQ person out there. I hope tonight shows you that you can be whoever you want to be.
I'm joined by Boston Globe columnist Joan and Tatishe Nteta, Associate Professor of Political Science at UMass Amherst. Tatishe, Joan, good to see you both.
Good to be here.
Tatishe, let me start with you. With all the history making in Massachusetts last night, will that translate into a different kind of governing or just different people filling the chairs?
And I think that's the central question going forward. I mean, this is the first time maybe in the history of the Commonwealth of Massachusetts in which, of course, we have a female governor, but you just look down at all these statewide offices. You have an auditor that's a woman. You have an attorney general that's a woman, a treasurer that's a woman. You have one of the state senators in the U.S. Senate who's a woman. So this is why diversity is important. It brings a different perspective. It leads individuals to ask different questions and bring different evidence to bear to solve the pressing problems of the state. And I think we will see somewhat of a difference in leadership and a difference in the focus on issues as a result of a more diverse set of not candidates anymore, but leaders in the Commonwealth.
Joan, I think it was yesterday you wrote that Maura Healey should thank Charlie Baker for not running. Is she going to govern like Charlie Baker in your estimation?
I think, that is another big question. She really is kind of a mystery as a governor to be. I know that she would disagree with that, but she ran a campaign that was, I think, very cautious, that did not reveal a lot about who she really is and what she really stands for and what her priorities are going to be. And she did really embrace Charlie Baker, and we'll see if that continues, if that embrace continues when he's no longer in the office and she is.
So if we can move on to D.C., starting with you, Joan. Biden has called it last night at least a vindication that the margin was smaller. But in the House I'm talking about, do the margins really matter? It seems to me that if you have a Republican speaker and Republican chairs of committees with a one-vote margin, you have Republican chairs and a speaker with a 40-vote margin. A majority is a majority. Am I minimizing the impact of the narrowness of the victory for the Republicans?
Well, it's kind of like in sports, right? If you lose by 1 point or 20 points, it's still a loss. However, I think politics is also an expectations game. And we went into yesterday really thinking, I was, sort of following the polls and the pundits.
So was I.
And everybody seemed to think it was just going to be a complete bloodbath. The fact that it isn't, I think, does somewhat change the dynamic and gives Joe Biden, something to crow about, so to speak. But how that translates to actually governing, the not much hope from the Republican side of things.
Tatishe, the only argument I've heard about how the margins matter is that lunatics like Marjorie Taylor Greene, I was going to say Lauren Boebert, but she may actually lose in Colorado, which is pretty stunning, that the crazies like that have more power over the speaker in their own party if there's a narrow margin as opposed to a broad one. Other than that, potentially, does it matter what the margin is for the Republicans in the House, assuming they win the majority, which they appear to be on their way to?
I agree that a majority is a majority, but you always want a larger majority such that you can ensure that your overarching policy goals are passed. At this point in time, you have each member of the Republican caucus is an important factor in passing anything that McCarthy, if he becomes the sort of speaker, would like to pass. And so this puts the onus on the leadership qualities of McCarthy and whoever decides to be, or whoever the caucus elects as whip, to get those folks in order and in line in order to ensure that the Republicans' vision and their policies are passed.
You know, Tatishe,
Jim, could I just add one thing?
Sure.
What I think is really interesting is how the conservatives, or the pundits at least, have turned on Donald Trump in the aftermath of this, and I think that is probably might give some hope for what happens in Washington.
I want to get back to Trump, by the way, but that you'd refer to him in an inappropriate way. If you read your own columns, he's the despicable Donald Trump, Joan. If you can do that properly, we'd really appreciate that. Can we get back to Trump in a second? I want to stay in Congress for just a minute, if we can. The exit, you're a polling kind of guy, Tatishe, and the exit polls I saw said that two of the areas where Democrats didn't get good news, they lost voters, people of color and white voters without a college education. Assuming those exit polls are right, why?
So, I mean, white voters without a college education have been moving towards the Republican Party for decades. So I don't think that's really any news to the Democratic Party. I think they've had a few candidates that had effectively mobilized white working class voters. You have Fetterman in Pennsylvania and in Ohio. You had Ryan, who many have seen as potentially a playbook to bring those individuals back to the fold. And so I think in 2 years, we'll see what the Democratic Party does. In terms of people of color, I think there's an assumption that African Americans, Latinos, Asian Americans, Native Americans are homogeneous. They are like any other group in the country. There are divisions within those groups. And the Republican Party has done an effective job in recognizing those divisions, the issues which mobilize portions of those communities, and getting them to vote for Republican candidates that speak to those particular policies, issues, and preferences. So in some ways, this is a triumph for the Republican Party to potentially break the hold of the Democratic Party over people of color. And that could potentially be beneficial for people of color as well, if they are seen as groups that can be mobilized.
Yeah, meaning that you don't just ask for the vote, you actually have to deliver on a promise that you've made to get that vote. You know, Joan, I quoted you a minute ago talking about the Senate for a minute. Your line in your piece was, "Call me an optimist, but I believe the perpetually despicable Trump also helped Democrats survive the perilous midterms." The conventional wisdom is the perpetually despicable Trump also delivered the majority in the Senate to the Democrats 2 years ago because of Georgia with Ossoff and Warnock. Is your perspective that he could play the same role with Warnock in a runoff in December yet again this round?
Well, it looks like, deja vu all over again. I mean, he seems like he can't help himself. The last time around, it was right after 2020, right? It was right after the election. And he just went down to Georgia and whined and complained and made it all about Donald Trump. He's done the same thing in the run-up to the midterms, and I don't think he can help himself. I believe that he will, try to do the same thing. This time around, though, it feels like that people in the Republican Party and the establishment have had enough of him. And maybe they'll just, kidnap him and keep him down in Mar-a-Lago. That's not being kidnapped, but somehow lock him in his basement or something and just keep him away from Georgia.
I could vote for that. Staying on what moved voters again, Tatishe, I bemoaned the fact on our radio show leading up to yesterday that abortion wasn't nearly as much of a motivating factor as I assumed it would be after the Dobbs decision, and I think I was wrong. When you look at constitutional amendments protecting the right to reproductive freedom in places like California, Michigan, Vermont, and obviously that, to me, a stunning vote against the constitutional amendment banning abortion in a place like Kentucky, that was a driving force that did keep the margin much narrower than expected, don't you think?
Yeah, without a doubt. I think it's an issue that mobilized particularly Gen Z to come out to vote. I think, polls did not particularly capture the importance of abortion. But But, if you look at a number of polls, the health of the democracy was one of the central issues that Democrats, progressives, and young people spoke to. And I think that connects with this notion of the abortion decision in Dobbs. It's a highly unpopular decision. A majority, and a pretty consistent majority of the nation, support a woman's right to choose. And the Supreme Court has gone against public opinion in the Dobbs decision. And this is the chickens coming home to roost in some fashion, that when you make decisions that are unpopular like that and they're connected to a particular policy or a particular party, that party is going to have some electoral consequences in the first election. The question is, going forward, is abortion going to continue to be this issue that mobilizes young people and does damage to the Republicans' chances?
One last thing, Joan, you've been chomping at the bit to get to Trump, so let's do it. He does an interview on News Nation. I don't even know what that is, but it's some right-wing cable network in which he's asked about the candidates he has endorsed, and he gives an answer that is so Trump-like, it is painful. Here is Donald Trump.
Well, I think if they win, I should get all the credit, and if they lose, I should not be blamed at all. And when they do well, I won't be given any credit, and if they do badly, they will blame everything on me.
There was no humor in that for those who were not watching his face as he was speaking. So, Joan, you wanted to is he a diminished character this morning as compared to what he was yesterday morning?
Well, I guess I shouldn't pretend to be an expert on, like what the Republicans are thinking, but I think that he is. And if you sort of read the commentary, and all of the attention and focus right now is on Ron DeSantis, the governor of Florida, who is seen as the next, new shiny new object. The front page of the New York Post has a picture of him and his wife and his little kids. That's the future of the party. So yeah, I think Trump is becoming yesterday's news.
Is he
Again,
yesterday's?
maybe I'm an optimist, but I hope that's true.
Tatishe, is she just being an optimist, or is that the reality potentially coming out of yesterday?
I mean, the proof is in some ways in the pudding. He won in 2016 in a very shocking fashion. But Republicans did not do well in 2018. They lost control of the House. In 2020, they lost control of the presidency as well as the Senate. And in 2022, a number of the candidates that he supported, potentially could lead to the loss of the U.S. Senate for the Republicans and less than expected gains in the House. And so I think the argument that the Republican leadership needs to make is whether or not this is actually a winner. Is someone hitching our wagon to this particular candidate, this particular former president, might actually do more damage than good electorally. And that's particularly true in federal elections because, Trump mobilizes. He mobilizes his base, but he also mobilizes a large and very emotional and affective opposition. And that's not good for Republicans. High turnout elections historically have not been beneficial for the Republican Party or candidates.
Got to hold it there. Tatishe Nteta, Joan Vennochi, thanks so much for your time, both of you.
Thank you so much.
Thanks.